As someone whose goal or mission has been to visit every country in the world, I've often thought, can you practically see the whole world in one human lifetime? So I decided to calculate it. And the answer, it turns out, whether or not you can see the whole world in a human lifetime, is a big it depends. And the answer might make you realize just how small we all really are.
Start it up.
Hi everybody, foXnoMad here, and today I want to help you travel smarter by going through a mental experiment if you travel or you're a traveler or you're just interested in travel that you may have thought about. Is it possible to see all of this in the average human lifespan? When I began to travel the world years ago, I broke down my goal into international borders. I did this mainly as a way to quantify a travel goal for myself, one that was feasible but came down to a concrete number, which, depending on how you count, can vary, but there are around 195 countries, not including a number of de facto states around the world. For me personally, being in a country or counting as having visited a country really boils down to being able to spend some reasonable amount of time there. I could, like some of the Guinness World Record holders, try to power through and visit all the countries of the world in record time. A record which keeps getting broken, but according to Guinness, to have a shot, you'd have to be in every country for less than 2 days and 20 hours, which to me isn't really visiting most of those countries at all. So it's entirely possible to visit every country in the world in less than 2 years with the right planning, logistics, budget, and of course spending as little time there as possible. Or you could take your time, but 195 countries is very doable. But there is a lot more to the whole world than 95 countries. So to do our little thought experiment, we're going to have to broaden our definition a little bit of what constitutes the whole world. We could define a quote-unquote place as somewhere with a population of 500,000 people or more to start with. But that's pretty broad and would exclude 60 countries, not to mention Antarctica. But let's start there just to show you the scale and the scope of the world that we're talking about. Cities with populations over 500,000 number about 1,000 in the world. Let's also add in some smaller cities, say 250, and sites like Mount Denali, for example, which don't have large population centers, and add 250 more of those, so we're going to add 500 total additional stops along our path. Keeping track so far? So basically what we've done is created a list of 1,500 places that we'd want to visit in our trip around the world. It's going to be 1,500 places in this little thought experiment that we're going to try to visit, all within one average human lifespan. So let's define average human lifespan and say about 60 years. So from about age 20 to about age 80. Let's say those are the travel years. Obviously, you can go more. You can, travel after that. You can travel before that. But for this experiment, we'll just say about 60 years, maybe 70 years total. And also to add to the thought experiment, we're going to need to define how long we're going to stay at each place. And it's a pretty subjective debate on how long you need to be somewhere to really see it. Some sites can be seen in a day, while some cities like Istanbul can take a lifetime to discover. To be practical though, I think a week is a good amount of time to become familiar with the city, especially the smaller ones, and it's about the average time most tourists would spend in a city, plus it gives you some time to do excursions outside of town. Now, I know you might be thinking, this is a pretty wide net to cast. I mean, this is the whole world. It's pretty big, and we've only selected 1,500 places, but I want to make a point with that. So we're going to start with a pretty broad and somewhat achievable number. Let's just go with 1,500 places in the whole world to make a point that you're going to see in a little bit. Due to travel time, I'm going to add 1 day of travel between each city. That equates to 8 days, 7 days per place, and 1 day for traveling for each destination in the world that we'll be visiting. So we've got 1,500 travel stops to do, and we're going to spend 8 days in each place for our little world experiment. Doing some quick math, 1,500 stops multiplied by 8 days comes out to 12,000 days, which is 1,714 weeks, or 32.9 years. Depending on how old you are, 32.9 years is doable, assuming nothing goes wrong along the way or there aren't significant delays or disruptions. If you started at age 20, you'd be able to accomplish the goal with some years to spare over the average human lifespan. Now you could try to cut that in half and do like 4 days in each place, and then it would end up being about 16 years of continuous travel, just nonstop, every 4 days, picking up and going to a place. But I really don't know if that's just humanly possible. I just think you'd probably go crazy if you tried to do that. But it puts some time reference in perspective for us. We know that 1,500 places, if you tried to visit one every week, you could do that in about 33 years. If you really took your time and added a couple of different stops along the way, you could do it in like 60 years. Again, it's possible. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but it is possible. But our thought experiment isn't over because we haven't answered the original question we started with, which is, can you see the whole world in a human lifespan? And given how long it's going to take to visit 1,500 destinations, you might be starting to get an idea of how difficult it's going to be to see the whole world. In our first trip around the world with only 1,500 destinations, we have omitted so many places. To broaden the scope a little bit, if we tried to include all the towns and cities in the world with 100,000 people as a minimum, that would put us at over 3,200 places to visit, and at 8 days at a time, that's 3,657 weeks, or 70.3 years to see it all. Even if you cut that in half, that's 35 years. And if you could somehow sustain that long of a trip with that much movement every week to see all 3,200 of those places, you probably wouldn't remember much of it because it would just seem like one huge blur. But still, we haven't included the entire world. We still haven't answered the original question. Now, you might be thinking, 3,200 places. Like, if you wanted to see all the cities and towns in the world with 100,000 people, with a population of 100,000 people, that would take you about 70 years. Now, you could probably do a couple of them like back to back. They were next to each other in like a couple of days, but it's still going to take you a really long time. And again, that's assuming you've got an unlimited budget, you don't have anything else come up, you ignore all your friends and family, you don't have any health issues. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we're ignoring. But even just seeing 3,200 places around the world is going to take you a really long time. And it's again showing us already, even though we're limiting the scope of this thought experiment so much, that the world we live in is actually a really big place. But let's keep going with this thought experiment because you know what? There are a bunch of national parks, historical sites, and over 1,110 UNESCO sites alone. What about cities with 50,000 people or less? That's small, but not that small. And there are places that are even smaller than that worth visiting, interesting people everywhere, and so much of the world to see. And don't forget about the sea. Water does make up 71% of the Earth's surface. And like I've already said, this assumes a lot of things. One, that you don't have any health issues, you have an infinite budget, you don't break down mentally from moving for 70 years constantly nonstop. All of that is going to be really difficult. This is really a thought experiment, and I don't think it would be possible for a human being to move for 70 years and to keep that goal for so long, because you would be committing basically your entire life to moving to a new place every week or every couple of days if you really wanted to try to hit this goal, even of 3,200 places, which seems pretty out of reach right now. But let's say you live to be 100 or 120, and you started when you were 20, so we're giving you 100 years to travel. You could get closer to that 3,200 number, but again, that's still not the entire world. But we haven't talked about the other dimension that we're always moving through, which is time. See, if you went to all of these places all around the world, if you visited a place at the beginning of your trip, let's say New York City or Rio, you visited that when you were 20 and you're still traveling 80 years later, when you go back, that's not going to be the same city. It's going to be vastly different. If you've been to a place, you've probably experienced this. So if you've been to a place and then visited 5 years later or 10 years later, there are some familiar elements, right? Like you go and you're like, oh, this feels very familiar. Things seem the same. But there's also a lot of things that have changed. Like cities change very rapidly, smaller places less so, but bigger places do change. But even all the people that you met, they're now older. If you haven't kept in touch with them 5, 10, 15 years later, when you go back to visit, those people have changed and you have changed along the way. So that movement through time that we all experience is also in play. And I focused a lot on the human places. And of course, there are a lot of natural places which are changing around the world, which may not exist in the future, that may change as as the climate changes and as the world changes. And we've really put a focus on human places, but there's also a lot of the natural world that we haven't included. Vast places like the Grand Canyon, like hiking the Grand Canyon, for example, or climbing a mountain. All those things are going to take longer than a week. So all of this is to say that the world is massive and that there are endless things to do, and that you're going to have to pick and choose the things you want to see and the things you want to spend time on. But traveling and traveling a lot, or as much as you want to, or as much as is possible for you, isn't a completely hollow pursuit, even though you can't see the whole world. You gain a lot of understanding about the people and the cultures of the world. You get to see how much more similar we all are than different. You get to see how different people have dinner or breakfast, or people around the world who skip breakfast. All those kind of things, I think, gives you a great understanding about humans and the planet. And also seeing the natural world gives you an idea of just how different and how many different environments there are. So even though you can't see it all, it's not a waste of time to see as much as you can. To me, that's not discouraging, but rather inspiring. Inspiring to know that we have all of these infinite places to see right around us on this planet of ours, but also that we are just a really, really small part of something that's a lot larger than ourselves. And it's a nice time to be alive, because even if we can't go everywhere, we can see it on TV, online, and YouTube videos like this one. I wanted to make this video both because I was curious about whether or not it was actually possible, but to put some of my own personal travel goals in perspective. When I first started my journey to visit every country in the world, and I started blogging and documenting my travels and started this YouTube channel, I was going at a really fast pace, and I got to 90 or 95 countries or so is where I'm at right now. I know I'll get to those 195 countries, those 100 countries that are still remaining. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the rest of the journey. But I'm not in as much of a rush as I was before, because I know there's just so much more to see. Thanks for watching and joining me on this little thought experiment. I hope it encourages you to see more of the world around you, no matter how far or close to home it happens to be. And like I said, if you want to see the rest of my journey and also a lot of tech along the way, make sure you hit the subscribe button. I'll have new videos for you every week, and I'll see you in the next video.